afternoon, everybody. I am here with Maura Quint of Americans for Tax Fairness, founder of the Tax March, and allegedly the funniest woman in America, according to Rolling Stone. Funniest non-gendered person with a Twitter account. Was that more accurate?
I was somewhere on their list. I'm not going to put myself at the top at the time, but
Okay, well, I can do that. I'm the host,
that's
right?
fine. Yeah. No, hey, I appreciate the bump. That's great.
I am so thrilled to have you here to talk about one of my favorite and least favorite topics, why Jeff Bezos is destroying all of us.
Yeah, it comes up a lot. He's got his hand in a lot of things.
And I think okay, so you've been doing this work for a long time. I sort of asked you this like a few minutes ago. Do you think most people understand how egregious the income/wealth disparity really is right now? Because it is quite extreme.
I don't think most people fully grasp it because I don't even think I fully grasp it. And I just stare at these numbers all day and play around with this. We have this general understanding because, we see reality TV, right? Keeping Up with the Kardashians. We know that for a birthday party, they can rent out a whole island and they can, bring in trained donkeys to put on shows where they juggle rabbits. I don't know what they're doing with their money. I just assume it involves animal tricks somehow. But we know that they can do anything that they want. They have that level of wealth, and it's not wealth that the rest of us can even think about achieving, right? Like when we think about how we would like to be rich, it's more like I'd like to be able to put my bills on auto pay and not have to think about, do I need to juggle this one? Can I afford that bill right now? I'd love for them just to be able to be paid. I'd love to be able to go to the grocery store and say, hey, that looks cool. Let's try that chocolate without thinking, wait a second, what's my grocery budget this month? No, we need rice. I can't be splurging over here. Like those are the levels of rich, or even, maybe like maybe the dream levels of I'd like to buy a really nice car or something like that. That's a sort of singular aspirational wealth thing, or be able to pay my rent or buy a house. But the type of money, the type of wealth that the wealthiest 1% in America has is
Uh,
I sorry if I cut out there for a
No, no,
second.
no,
We
it's
got all
okay.
sorts of wins. The type of wealth that the 1% have is really fathomable. And I think I think they don't even understand how much money they have.
I love that you bring that up. To prepare to talk to you, I was reading this book called Davos Man that I highly have you read this book? I love it, and I think everybody should read it because it's Peter Goodman, New York Times reporter on this sort of thing, and he's talking about like the most bizarre parts of these people when you talk to them is they don't have a conception of them in possession of global order ruining wealth. They're like, yeah, I'm just like this entrepreneur. I'm just like this social capitalist. And sure, I own a few islands, but who hasn't
Right.
owned that level of property eventually,
Hmm. No, I mean there's a point at which if they could truly conceptualize how much money they had access to, they wouldn't try to get any more money. They'd just
Mhm.
enjoy spending one millionth of what they currently have. I mean, they can't spend it in their lifetimes. They can't get rid of it if they wanted to. But, I think a lot of people would certainly be like, hey, good enough. I don't have to work. I don't have to do anything. I can just, kick it and get massages all day and go wherever I want. And I mean, it also becomes sort of a what is the point of gaining that level of wealth? And it's even more frustrating when you recognize that it is so out of the bounds of understanding the numbers, the amount of wealth that they have, that they don't need, they don't care about, and yet they fight so hard to protect every last drop and to still hoard more. It's incredibly frustrating.
I've been starting to think of it as just like a modern monarchy, right? Because the psychological dynamic feels similar to me. People, we like, especially in the left, but everywhere, we tend to think of like, of course, it's ridiculous that anyone would be a king or queen Duh. Yet the people of the time obviously were all about it. They were riding into battle for their monarchs. They were going on crusades and things of that nature. And it's like the way we fetishize the intelligence of someone like Elon Musk or
Yes.
Jeff Bezos or any or Peter Thiel or any of these people who, whether you want, like, whether they're intelligent or hardworking or not is sort of immaterial. Nobody needs to own so much egregious social and economic capital that you're literally just controlling the world order. That's, nobody needs that much power.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about, whether it's just that they're so smart or just that they're so hardworking, I mean, obviously, we know that there are a tremendous amount of people who work incredibly hard, doing all sorts of various jobs, multiple jobs at once, who juggle. Sorry, there's also a dog going crazy behind me. She gets really upset about, you know, wealth inequality.
I
It just
figured.
makes her lose her mind, and she has to play with it. So, Um, sorry. Hi, everyone. This is
Hello.
real life. This is real life now. We're all just sitting in our living rooms, desperately trying to connect on.
Mara only has one single $1 billion, which is
It's not
why
nearly enough. It's
it's
not
just
nearly
not enough.
if someone could help me out with it, I'd appreciate it greatly. Yeah, no, the money at this point, the wealth accrues so fast, you really can't even stop it. So even regardless of what intellect or work went into beginning to gather wealth to them, it then starts to avalanche down, and it stops entirely being about how much work or smarts or earnestness that is going into it. It's gathering on its own at a rapid clip. It's just becomes an avalanche of wealth that becomes almost hard to stop. And that's what happens with all of these sort of 1%, and especially the 0.1% of billionaires in our country.
You said something on Twitter that I'm gonna misquote. Wasn't it like, these economists are basically tarot card readers? And I was like, yes, yes, exactly. Because it doesn't make any sense, right? Like, if you try to explain the way our economy works to a 10-year-old, it's like, okay, so you have people that actually do work, like teachers and nurses and doctors, and then you have these other people that they just like play ping pong ball with these things called investments, and then they just get more and more power. It's hard to see it as anything other than a wealth extraction system where, middle and working class people actually provide value to the economy by
Mhm.
doing things we can measure and prove, like, again, starting a hair salon or being a janitor, doing actual labor, and these other people who just, again, exist in this exploitative ruling class. And I think we've gotten caught up at this point with, oh, but like any of us could do it, right? Any of us could become a billionaire. And I think sometimes leftists get distracted. They're like, no, those guys started out rich. Personally, I don't care. I don't care if we're pulling billionaires from the working class. Like,
Mhm.
they still shouldn't exist.
Oh yeah, no, it was Dan Riffle who had the line, "Every billionaire is a policy failure," and I think that is 100% true. And every billionaire is a failure of our tax and economic system that has been created to allow them and to allow them to grow at this incredibly unnatural clip. It's really ridiculous. And when we talk about that level of accumulation of wealth, like I said, if they tried to spend it all, they couldn't, but there are some massive things that they can put money into. One of which is influencing our political process, and they do. Um, in fact, the Citizens United decision, which opened up and allowed for a tremendous amount of wealth to flood the election cycle, really, there was a significant change. Before Citizens United, billionaires were providing less than 1% of all political contributions in presidential campaigns. In the 2020 election cycle, so after Citizens United has sort of opened this door, billionaires contributed nearly $1 out of every 10.
That horrifies me. I mean, it shouldn't shock me, but it does.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of influence that they're able to buy into our system. And then, then you wonder, why are all of our laws and structured so that the rich get richer and richer? Well, because the rich are funding politicians and making sure that they have the desire and
And
inclination to do that.
we have so many more of them. In 1990, there were 66 billionaires. In 2020, there are 614, which means it's not just the number of billionaires, it's the number of the people who are on track to becoming billionaires, like hundreds of millionaires. I mean, it's something that like increasingly has gone from a few exorbitantly wealthy people to an entire class of extreme wealth. I
Mhm.
I recently read this line that would probably not blow your mind, but it blew mine, that this whole thing is the result of post Cold War prosperity, where instead of us having this phase of like peace and less war and less violence, instead there were these people that were like, oh, okay, I'm gonna get really, really rich and stack the peace stack that should have been a peace for everyone, and instead make it an increasingly unequal hellscape. Like, which
Well, there's money in unequal hellscapes, it's good business.
you know what? That's very true, though. Like the unequal conditions, which is a point I think Rhett Butler makes in the incredibly racist novel Gone with the Wind, that war, inequality, crisis will always be very good for a small number of people. So,
Absolutely.
the reason I asked you on here today, other than the fact that you're wonderful, of course, is there might be some good news, right? So, Joe Biden is introducing the first tax on this class of person. Could you, because I've heard you explain it a couple times and it really helped me. It's the problem right now is that people are taxed on income, when of course billionaires are not really, their net worth isn't growing exponentially because they get a paycheck.
Right.
Could you explain this for people?
Sure. I can try at least. But no, that's exactly it. You've already laid the foundation there. We get paychecks. The vast majority of us get a paycheck, and from our paycheck, federal income taxes are taken out and they go into the system and presumably then are used to pay for all sorts of things. Um, Billionaires, in particular, don't tend to get a paycheck. No one is writing Jeff Bezos, here's your several $1 billion paycheck this year. That's not what's happening. Instead, his money is in stocks and in ownership of businesses, not just his in particular, but that's where the vast majority of wealth is. And I think what tends to get a little confusing for a little is that that wealth that they own, people will say it's just on paper. It's not real money. It's not actually in the bank. They can't actually spend it. And yet somehow they are. Somehow they're spending a ton of money. They're not getting a paycheck, but they still somehow can buy super yachts that can get stuck in bridges and, take out whole towns. That's still somehow happening. And the how is that this increase in wealth, so they have X amount of stocks valued at $10 at the start of the year, and at the end of the year, it's valued at $100. They had a $90 wealth increase, but just on paper, right? Well, they can take that to a bank and say, look, I'm good for it. I have all this money. And a bank will give them a tremendously low interest rated loan, the sort of loan that you and I would not have access to. So the bank takes that and makes their money liquid by giving them the loans. But at no point in any of that are they paying any taxes on any of this because it's not technically income, right? It's not a paycheck that they're getting, so they don't pay taxes out of it. And yet it is in fact income, it's wealth that has accrued and that they are able to turn into liquid money and buy real things. So that is the money that is being targeted with what Biden has put forth and what some other senators have also put forth in various proposals. The idea is that we should be taxing that increase in tradable asset wealth. It's incredibly important because right now, billionaires are paying lower tax rates than most of the rest of us. They're certainly paying lower tax rate than, say, an average nurse, which is silly. It's kind of ridiculous that a nurse should be paying a higher tax rate than Jeff Bezos. That's not how it should be.
Well, and I mean, Warren Buffett was, I think, one of the first to come out against his own people and be like, "Hey, I shouldn't be paying fewer taxes than my secretary." And it's like you're saying, Maura. I think a lot of I sometimes when I think about it, I wonder how much of this, at least at the beginning, wasn't malicious but just naivety. Like, oh, because we forget that not that long ago, this wasn't how the economy worked. When people owned stuff, they owned actual stuff. Like
Well, I mean, that's true, but stocks have been around for a really long time, and certainly that level of wealth has existed for some time, but we have had the rules change a lot on all of this. I think that's the thing that I like to kind of remember and remind people, because sometimes people will have this sort of instinct like we can't change anything. This is the way it's always been, when in fact, this is not the way it's always been. This is the way it continually gets manufactured to be. And so we see things like the top marginal income rate falling tremendously over the years. There was a point in American history, this is not billionaires, obviously, we're talking about the actual income rate, but still, there was a point at which the top income rate was 90%. It's gone way down, and the idea of that is ridiculous now. I mean, a couple of years ago, Congresswoman Ocasio Cortez was suggesting a 70% rate, and there was a tremendous amount of outrage for that, even though it's lower than what we've historically had it in America. So it's not that we can't change things. We absolutely can. It's that there has been a resistance to changing things in any way that would help the average person. The changes tend to come in the form of something like the Republicans did in 2017 when they passed their Trump tax law, which lowered the corporate tax rate, which created this vast giveaway to the rich. That's the kind of change that we tend to see. And up until very, very recently, that's really the only kind of change we've tended to see. And that has been on the left and the right. Um, you know, 5 years ago, even, I would say, if you went around and tried to talk to Democrats, even about the idea of taxing the rich. Now, some were fully on board. I'm certainly not saying this is across the it's not everyone, but there was still a general idea that you can't talk about taxing the rich. You can't even bring that up. It's political poison. You can't do it. No one wants it. You have to get around it some other way or use a different word or, whatever tap dance. And that is just not the case anymore. It's completely changed. And it has changed over a really short period of time. And it has changed for a lot of reasons. But I think one of the biggest is because people are fed up and they're demanding that this not be the case anymore. They're recognizing that the wealth inequality is completely out of control, and they want uniformly for politicians to do something about it. In fact, there's far more appetite for this kind of economic change among the population and among voters across the aisle than there is still in the elected officials. But we're getting closer and closer, and that's why Biden's budget was a really big deal to me. It was a really big deal to me in this particular area, I will say, just this one niche part. But we have a president calling for a tax on billionaire wealth. That would have been completely unthinkable just a couple of years ago. The fact that he's actually identifying the way in which billionaires are gaining their money and looking to actually proactively do something about that can start to close the wealth gap is really exciting to me. So I was excited. I was happy about something, which is rare these days. So we got to take the wins where they come.
Well, it is exciting. And, it's directly thanks to your organizing specifically. Normally when I'm saying that, I'm like, thanks to viewers like you. No, I'm literally talking about you. Like, you started the tax march. What was that like?
I co-started the tax march with
My
many other
apologies.
people. No, I know. I alone could never have done it. It was the weirdest thing, really. And but I think tax march is like such a great example because it really demonstrates the way that the general population felt and the anger that was out there. I mean, tax march started because two people, a law professor, Jennifer Taub, and a comedy writer, Frank Lesser, both tweeted out that we needed a march on April 15th to demand Donald Trump release his tax returns. So, I mean, Twitter gets a bad rap, but like occasionally it does something good. And both of them put these tweets into the world and people were really excited and they blew up and they became huge things. And I got involved because of Twitter and said, "Hey, how can I help make this happen?" And was lucky enough to get to work with all of the organizers across the country who, some of them were community organizers and activists and people who had been working for progressive politics for a long time. And some of them were just people who said, "I want to do something. I'm sick of this. I don't care. Like, I'm going to round up the people I know in Peoria and we're going to take to the streets." It was pretty amazing. So, April 15th, 2017, there were over 200 marches across the country with people coming out demanding Donald Trump release his tax returns specifically so that we can see how the wealthy make their money, and specifically so we can see how the president makes his money, who he's tied to, and what sort of laws he's creating and prioritizing, and who benefits from those laws. It was one of the first times that we saw a mass movement on the left to say, "Hey, what are these laws good for? What are you doing with our economic system? Who are you writing these for, and who is benefiting from it?" It was massive. And I mean, I've just been lucky enough to be part of it and to kind of keep help moving it forward. But I really have to say it's been the organizers across the country who have been pushing this through, who organize editorials, they go out and meet candidates, they ask questions about tax reform and taxing the rich and corporate rates and all of these sort of things. And I think the vast majority of them, and me, none of us thought we would be doing this. We didn't think we'd be talking about taxes. That wasn't something we like set out to do when our guidance counselor asked us where we were going to go in life. Like that, we weren't sitting there being like, what I really am interested in is offshore profits and yeah, tax havens, and I want to talk loopholes. That's what I want to do every day. Not at all. But here we are doing it. And it's really cool to me. It's really like neat to get to be a part of. And I love it, which is insane.
Well, and I think, what I loved about the love slash present tense about the tax march and, Americans for Tax Fairness and everything you do is it's like it's building this mentality that wealth and poverty are both created by systems of power, which is something that sounds obvious now. But I remember when I first encountered that idea, it's like, oh, duh. Because intrinsic to this American culture we have is wealth runs along the lines of merit. And if you push against that, you will, obviously no one on our team is going to get angry against pushing against that, but you will get a lot of pushback, even from people that consider themselves progressive and democratic. And that, back to what you were saying about, the wildest things about a lot of these billionaires is that they probably do consider themselves progressive liberal Democrats. Like, oh yeah, like I'm not a racist, I'm not a homophobe, I'm not one of those things. I just create systems of power which suck the wealth and opportunity out of all those communities. It's not on purpose, so it's nothing personal, and that's what's so different and strange about this new era we're entering, where it's, there's this new vigilance we have to have about, it's not just about like believing in equality and in a disembodied abstract way. It's about buying into policy decisions which actually create that equality in a material way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, e even if you look at, what is her name? The former Mrs. Bezos, who's,
Oh, yeah.
giving
She's
away
fascinating.
all of this money. She's made this commitment to make these massive donations and give away a tremendous amount of her wealth, and that is great. That's wonderful. That is certainly something to be lauded, and she should be thanked and praised for that, and it's a good thing that she's doing. But really big but here. I like big butts. Cannot lie. Um, we can't rely on a billionaire choosing to be philanthropic. That is in no way a replacement for changing the systems that are in place to make sure that that level of vast wealth cannot be accumulated, not to that level. And I think that's something that we should be hitting over and over. And I mean, I would love to see her invest in changes to our tax law that would actually start to fix the system and that would actually start to target some of this inequality and change the ways in which the wealthiest are taxed so that we can start creating a fairer system. That's something that we desperately, desperately need. We can't really wait around and just hope that the other 700 billionaires will come on board and decide, like, yay, I want to be nice too. That's just not going to work.
Well, and it's really interesting as you open the show with this that wealth, I think a lot of people get confused. Like, wealth means different things for this class of people than it does for them. For them, getting richer than their fellow billionaires is getting an A in capitalism. And that's why they want it. They're like, I want the biggest yacht. And I'm not going to even investigate what men measuring their yachts against each other really signifies. But like for us, wealth is security, it's healthcare, it's safety from disaster, it's college for our children or ourselves. And this is the problem, right? I think my thing with this is I don't begrudge these people yachts or planes or whatever they want. The problem is that it's creating a world that is unlivable for all of us, where our paychecks are smaller and they buy less.
Right. Well, I mean, this kind of to me plays into the whole discredited notion of trickle down economics, right?
Mhm.
There was this thought process that came about in the 80s, and Reaganomics was certainly a key driver of the theory of trickle down. And the theory of trickle down said if we just make sure that the rich have tons of money and keep getting more, you know, they'll let it get down to everybody. They'll make it rain on the rest of us.
Mhm.
And we never saw that. And that, I mean, this idea came about in was really popularized. It was popularized in the 80s. Now we're 40 years out from that, and we can very definitively say it has not worked. And in fact, what we see time and time again is that when you give the richest a dollar, they hoard it. They don't spend it on anything. They lock it away because they don't need it. So it just gets put in their vault and never seen again. But if you give someone who needs that dollar a dollar, it goes out into the economy and it stimulates the economy and boosts it because you give the rest of us a dollar, we go to the grocery store, we go put gas in our car, we even, hire that guy to come over and finally fix the sink that has been leaking for the last 3 years, but we just never could really afford to do anything about it. We immediately take it and spend it often in very local boosting ways. So it's been fascinating how long we have allowed the insidiousness of trickle down to drive things. I mean, again, up until even 2017, when the Republicans did that Trump tax cut, that was really the theory of it. We needed to give tax cuts to the rich, but don't worry, it'll help you too. It didn't.
Well, so what could you talk a little specifically about, like, because I've had this conversation with people that I think are good and reasonable people. They're like, well, if we tax them, they'll just bring their wealth. That, of course, is great for American communities. They'll bring it elsewhere. I mean, could you explain why that is wrong as someone who is the expert on these things?
I'll tell you why it's wrong as someone who is not the expert on these things. And
That'll be fine. That's great.
what are our two highest tax states in the country?
I don't know.
California and New York.
Oh, interesting.
Which is why there's no rich people living in California and New York, right?
Right, that's what I hear about those places.
There's no rich people there. None. They have the highest concentrations of the wealthiest individuals as well. That concept of, well, they'll just take it and go is one of these interesting economic theory underpinnings that has made its way into normal talk. But a lot of economic theory is just rife with these wrong-headed assumptions that tend to assume that all humans are tremendously rational and act in their own best interest at all times, which anyone who's met another human being or ever existed or looked in a mirror or I don't know, sat on a couch tired at the end of the day and ordered from Grubhub when you could have some cereal or make something in your cabinet, but you know what, screw it, I want tacos. Like it, we're not rational creatures. That's not how we operate. And it doesn't get more rational as you get richer. That's not a thing that comes with wealth. It really actually isn't. In fact, we are creatures who have all sorts of considerations at any given moment. Things like, where do I like to be? Where's my
Yes.
friends? Where are my family? Where does it make sense to me if I want to show off to other people? Where are my social obligations? There's a lot of different factors, or even just, I don't feel like it. I'm lazy. I don't want to. There's a tremendous amount of factors that go into why we are at any given place. And so the idea that like everyone will just rationally choose the lowest tax country and immediately relocate there is, we know it's not true because we already see it. It's not the case. Now, there are certainly arguments to be made in terms of when you're talking about corporate taxes and you're talking about where corporations might be um, homed and housed, and when you're talking about it's going to a lawyer who's figuring out where they're going to file the paperwork based on where it's cheapest to incorporate and that type of thing. That's a different set of rules and things to consider, and an important one that we also need to look at. um, but there but it's a whole separate kind of set of things, and there are a lot of policies that are looking to examine that. But this notion that we're all just acting in our economic best interest all the time, from a very dispassionate place, is just nonsense. And one of the reasons why we should keep funding the humanities in school, because it can't just be math and science. Sometimes we have to look at why people psychologically make choices that they make as well.
Well, and as you're talking, I'm reminded of like a lot of things actually. One of the number one resources that America has is the one we're not investing in, which is that we do have some of the finest educational institutions in the world. And that's not me being an American exceptionalist or whatever. That's just it's pretty, demonstrably true, which is why elites of other countries come here. And we should be investing in our educated workforce. Like, if we really want to play, like, oh, billionaires live here forever, if we really want to play that game, we should be investing in the minds of ordinary Americans. And yet, for some reason, we're not doing that. It's like, oh, can you afford a six-figure higher education finishing degree that may or may not guarantee you professional work afterwards? No, so sorry. Good luck. Enjoy the Hunger Games that is being working class in America. And it's, and like as you're talking, I'm also like, right, exactly. A lot of people who become billionaires are driven by the status of living in Manhattan or Silicon Valley. They're not going to just abscond for whatever. And
South Dakota has tremendously low tax rates, and you can hide a lot of money there. Now, that's been good for people who want to open accounts and hide assets, but you also still don't see a lot of people moving to South Dakota. It hasn't become this booming place where all of the rich people live. But part of the additional problem when you're talking about something like education, I mean, and one of the fun things is that all of our systems are deeply interconnected and deeply flawed. And so there's never just sort of one thread to pull. It's all tied together, and we need to untangle it simultaneously and from a lot of different directions. And one of the problems that we can have is that a lot of our economic modeling is not set up to calculate things like, what does it mean if we invest in education? If we take that money, what do we actually save? What are the outcomes of having people who are well educated and skilled and have a lot of abilities? They're not really set up for that. So instead, a lot of times when you try to do budget scoring on something like an education investment, you wind up with these really low scores that actually say stuff like, well, you're kind of throwing your money away because you don't get anything out of it because it's not able to take in all of the various types of data that prove it to be to be an untrue conclusion. And so we look just at the numbers and we say, well, that score is really low and that's really hard to justify. So it becomes a political liability, and politicians don't necessarily want to invest in it. And so there's this whole terrible web where we also need politicians to really to run and to govern on values, and specifically, of course, progressive values that actually look to uplift people and to help those in need rather than focus too much on these outdated models that give scores or that kind of pump out numbers that aren't really all that accurate or reflective of anything we really want to see.
I love that you say that because that's been like the older I get, that's more and more my personal gripe. Like the more educated I am on the ways we make decisions in this country about public policy and about investment. It's like like, having, even what I just said, I would argue with myself, like the premise is flawed, right? Like the reason to have an educated population, it's an intrinsic good. Like why do you want to have a beautiful cities or a clean planet or an equal world? Those are all intrinsic goods. And whether you're a capitalist or not, I think everyone should take umbrage with the idea that the only thing to govern for is just like pros and cons of lists and numbers, which for the record, I think the list of numbers are on our side. But even if they weren't, there is, the whole point ideally of being a part of a country is wanting, or world is wanting that country and world to be as healthy and peaceful and wonderful as possible. And that doesn't work if the options we're giving young people is like, do your best to make millions and billions of dollars. And if it doesn't work, literally everything from housing to healthcare to education it'll be a toss up. Maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that comes from this sort of American bootstrapping mentality that is really has been ingrained in the culture to date. Although I think we're pushing away from that. I think that we're finally recognizing that that is problematic, and at the same time, we're not putting enough systems in place to counter it to really make it worth anyone's while yet. But we do have a society right now where if you want to get sick, you better be wealthy. If
Mhm.
you want to go to school and you want childcare, you better have some money. We're not giving people anything or any ways to get ahead. All we're showing people is if you want to protect your family, if you want to be able to make it through any number of crises that might hit, you better have stored up a tremendous amount of wealth. And that's on you. And so we even have, I think, people who maybe, ideologically recognize that that is a problem, but still, what are they supposed to do? So they have a lot of reasons to justify obtaining wealth because, I agree with you in principle, or, one can tell themselves, I agree with you in principle. And at the same time, I don't want to have to worry that I'm going to be homeless if my child gets into a car accident and needs, a long hospital stay or something. So we have to be building both at the same time. We have to be building these systems in place that allow people to follow through on the ways in which they want to live. And we can't divorce them, and we can't just say, you know, this doesn't work. We shouldn't have billionaires, but at the same time, we're not going to invest in people. We need to actually be putting that money and the revenue that we can raise off of taxing billionaires into programs that can uplift the rest of society.
And that's a thing, right? Because it's like you're saying. I mean, I have gotten so much less judgmental as I get older because I'm like, you
Yeah.
know what? I can't even blame people for just wanting to keep their heads down. And because we live in a country where even like this extremely upper middle class are one medical emergency away from financial precarity. And that's not, I would argue that's not a free country, right? I mean, if you have to be tremendously affluent to afford the basic entry level goods that make a comfortable existence, how is that free? Like that sounds like a very stressful culture in my opinion.
I have two children, and when I had my first child, I was working full time, and I was very fortunate and had, a reasonably good job, and my partner was also employed, and we both had health care, and we felt really like we're fine. Uh,
Mhm.
and then there was a bit of complication, and I was in the hospital for a couple of days, not a long time, like 2 or 3 days, when normally they try and get you right out the door. And again, we had health insurance and got like a $5,000 to $6,000 hospital bill just coming out of that. And it was like, I mean, I remember at the time being like, do you think they'll repo the baby? Like, what's going to happen?
Did that
I thought,
happen? Do you still have the child in question?
I do. Yeah, we've been running from them ever since. We've gone cross country and they haven't caught up with us yet. But that's what happened, and we were fortunate because we were able to get through it. But we didn't have that on hand, and we were at that point, like a childless couple with the both employed and reasonably employed. Like, we should have been in the best place ever to deal with that, and we were, and it was still just sort of scraping by and having to put together a whole plan. And I can't imagine what other people are doing, and there are lots of other people, and that's the thing that I sort of get struck with a lot. I've been pretty lucky, knock on everything. I am in a place of general privilege with my life, and I think often if I lost my job, which has happened to millions and millions of people, I'd be it would be a tremendous problem, and I don't know how people are getting through it without our helping them at all. Um,
Well, and that's the
it's
thing. I mean,
unsustainable.
it's totally unsustainable. Like we talk about like, you know, it isn't socialist to believe that basic goods should be affordable. We have like a housing shortage. We have, degrees that don't even guarantee a job afterwards that are like, $50,000 a year. And it's all linked together. It's all tied because, if this bill passes, right? So what would this mean for people if Biden gets everything he wants? I saw there was, funding into climate prevention stuff or climate prevention. Hopefully, we'll still have a climate and it will be a better version of that climate. Head Start.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the places where I can certainly begin to feel hopeless and terrified is looking at how much needs to be done, and how it feels like we're not moving there fast enough. It feels like it's not sustainable. We have to be running at all of these things at a full hilt, or we won't be able to actually make anything better in time, basically. And that is true to some extent. But there is, I guess, the way that I counter it and I sort of find hope is in how far we have come so quickly and in how many incredible people are working so hard to make so many big changes. And climate is a huge one. Um, the people that I know who have been focused on climate work are the most inspiring, incredible people, and they work so hard and they have gotten so far. And there seems to be a lot of political will to act on it, which is really important and really good to see. And now there's always been this constant refrain of how are you going to pay for it, no matter what good we want to do. It's how are you going to pay for it unless it's war or something like that, and then nobody asks and nobody cares. But assuming you want to do something that's actually going to help people, how are you going to pay for it? And so from that end, it's really great to see politicians embracing the very clear answer, which is taxing the rich, taxing billionaires. That's how we're going to pay for it. It's really straightforward. There is money if you insist on one-to-one budgeting, if you insist on raising the revenue to directly pay for the programs that you want to do, which that's a whole other question as to whether or not we should be doing that. I don't think we should, but let's assume that that's where we are right now with the PAYGO rules. Uh, we still don't have to worry because there's the opportunity to raise all of the money that we need to do all of the things we need to do. And now we're seeing politicians get on board with actually being willing to make those changes and to tax the rich in all of these various ways to raise that revenue that can then turn around and be invested into the things that we need to be investing in. So that does make me more hopeful.
And it is, again, I really am just so grateful for your activism on this. And, everyone at Americans for Tax Fairness, like, you guys really kill it and, provide.
Grateful.
So, yeah, I mean, like, Tax March and ATF, like, seriously, Maura, like, I really appreciate, because it's not like enough people don't understand that, again, this is like the issue. This is the line behind everything we care about. I mean, I like it's ever this, so the whole premise of this show, Pursuit of Happiness, it's my show, I should know why I called it that, is because, like, this, we have been, I really do believe that it is a great gaslighting of this society that we're taught to think of personal issues in like these individual emotional terms, when a lot of the personal stressors in our lives right now are the results of policy, or
Mm-hmm.
specifically bad policy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like we have student debt crisis. We have couples wondering if they can afford kids. We have all these healthcare horror stories, some of which 45,000 people a year die due to lack of health insurance. Like, these are always phrased in emotional, personal terms, but they're not. They're
Right.
not. They're political failings. And, I'm just so grateful to all of you for making that clear to people.
I mean, I am. I feel tremendously honored to get to work along the sort of people that I work with. And I mean, I didn't come from this background, as I was telling you. This is not. I didn't set out to be an economist. I did not set out to work in economic issue area, but I absolutely love it. And one of the key things that we tried to do, especially at Tax March, was really empower people to talk about economics, because there tends to be this sort of feeling like you can't speak about this because you don't understand macroeconomic modeling and you didn't get some advanced degree from a London school of economics, and so you don't really know and you can't actually say anything. And it has been created that way. The economic field has purposefully tried to keep people out of it, and in reality, we can all talk about the economy and we can all talk about economics because we all have it as part of our lives. It is part of our lived realities, and we need to be talking about it. And so, the more people who raise their voices and ask politicians, ask candidates, ask, whomever, even talk to your neighbors about about taxation, about fair economy issues, the better off we all are. And, I was shocked. I didn't think anybody would really want to, but it turns out people care. They care a lot and they want to be having these conversations. And it has made a huge, huge difference. And I'm incredibly grateful to work with the organizers at Tax March, who are now actually Tax March has is merging into a new organization called Unrig the Economy, which actually launched today. So that's fantastic.
That's amazing.
That's going to be focusing on taxing the rich, as well as combating corporate power and corporate greed, and building worker power. So it's the acknowledgement that there are a multitude of things that need to happen concurrently. And so Unrig the Economy is going to try and come at it from a sort of three-pronged approach. So that's really an exciting thing. And then getting to be at Americans for Tax Fairness is really incredible because we have done a lot of work specifically diving into all of this billionaires information. Americans for Tax Fairness puts out billionaires reports every year, and we are actually going to be launching an action coming soon this Friday. So if anyone wants to go to americansfortaxfairness.org and sign up, join our mailing list so you can find out about the actions that we're going to be doing through the next several months, specifically talking about the enormity of billionaire wealth and the need for us to finally start taxing billionaires. So we'll have a lot going on there.
I love that so much. And I will definitely do that. That's in what, 2 days, Friday? That's awesome.
Is it what day of the week is it? Oh gosh.
Well, and I love what you said about like feeling excluded from the economic conversation because we're not economists. And that is something I'm only recently, as a 30-year-old woman, starting to overcome because they will go hard. The
Yeah.
business majors and economics majors, they'll be like, you don't understand the economy. Come to find out, their classes are just like, sorry, but a lot of it is capitalist brainwashing. And I'm not being a jerk here because I don't think that's true of all economic academics at all. At all. There are lots of amazing economists out there, but there are also a lot of schools. My alma mater is one, Catholic University Business School, entirely funded by the Koch brothers.
Oh
And
yeah.
they make no bones about the fact that, yeah, we are gaslighting young professionals into like, I took a couple of the classes out of curiosity. It was wild. It was like, so why do you think the Bible is anti union? I was like, what?
Wow.
Is this a joke? Nope, nope, nobody's laughing. Okay. And we forget that a lot of, even if you aren't an expert in economics, like you are the expert in your own personal finances. You are the expert in how much things are costing you that shouldn't cost you that much. It's egregious that it's thousands of dollars to have a baby. Something that we all will be going, especially when you have insurance, right? I mean, most of us don't have $5,000 that we can easily part with.
No, not at all. That was a very interesting experience and an eye-opening one. No, I mean the economists are very interesting. I've met some of the most brilliant people who are economists, but I think most that I've spoken to will say that the profession has some underpinnings of it that need to be challenged at the very least.
Mhm.
But there are some groups that are coming together and putting forth new progressive economic models and theories, which is really wonderful to see as well. I would Groundwork Collaborative is a fantastic organization that is challenging a lot of the dominant theories of economics and really looking at it from a progressive lens. And it's really a wonderful organization. So, as long as you're signing up for emails, I'd go there too.
I love that.
They're
I will look them up. That's very cool. Right, because I mean, I think a lot of it's like you're saying, like a lot of people in just their personal lives and in the economics are like, okay, if an economy and or a theory of material wealth doesn't result in the majority of a population being just basically healthy, not even prosperous, But then who is that theory really serving?
That's right. And in general, we have to look at that. Who is being served by a lot of the policies that have been made? Who is being served by the system that we have in place? And it is a very rich population and a very white population, as well as a very male population, that we have created these laws specifically to gear towards and to allow that particular segment of the population to continue to accrue greater and greater amounts of wealth, which is another element that we really need to be diving into a lot more. I'm sure you saw Florida, whoever Rick Scott put out his plan for Republicans, I suppose, for what they want to do. And one of the things in it, which maybe wasn't as sort of flashy as the other terrible things inside of this package, but was to cut any sort of demographic reporting in all of the things that are gathered. So if people are paying taxes, we don't need to know anything about who you are uh, at any point, which, is one of those things that could even maybe sound good, I suppose, to a
Sure.
certain person. But in actuality, we need a lot more demographic data. We need to really put on display how these policies are hurting particular groups, because a lot of times we will talk about, or not now, but certainly people have talked about the tax code being race neutral. Uh, but in fact, it has been set up specifically to benefit white populations and to disadvantage Black communities in particular, as well as other minority communities. We need more demographic data so that we can start isolating exactly the ways that these things are negatively impacting communities, and we can start making changes. And um, citing all my work here, that is certainly Dorothy K. Brown had a fantastic book, The Whiteness of Wealth, this past year, and
Mm.
that's something that she's advocating for. So I'm just backing up her work, which is fantastic.
Oh,
Sorry,
I will.
I'm giving your readers, like, or your listeners, a list, a reading list. They have to sign up
I
for email.
love this. Are you
We
kidding?
have a whole sort of club here and talk through economics.
No, this is amazing. I love this so much because it's a difficult ask, like, "Okay, how do we get people to become tax activists?" And you are telling us, so thank you so much. I was gonna ask you a lot of questions about your humor career and humor activism, but we got to an hour already, so will you come back
I'll
sometime and
just make
talk?
jokes next time, I promise.
Okay, no, I loved every minute of this. Thank you so much, Mara. Find her on Twitter. I am not making this up. Rolling Stone called her the funniest person to ever exist. This is getting more hyperbolic the more I say it.
I love it.
Thank you so much for being on, and I can't wait to have you back.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. I can't wait to be back.
We'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.